Hey, writers. Last week I talked to you about a series that I'm wanting to launch called Nada to Novel. It is a zoomed out approach telling you the five basic steps that you're going to need if you're going to get all the way from 0 words on the page to a finished manuscript that is ready to pitch or ready to publish. So I'm going to jump right in today. The first step in those five steps is building your skills as a writer. So today I'm going to be going over some of the resources that I used as a brand new writer that really helped me to develop my craft and move things forward in that area of expertise. So as a brand new writer, you've got this huge story in your head, right? It's anywhere from 80,000 words to 120,000 words if you're going the traditional publishing route. And you've got to do some planning in order to get all that out onto the page in a way that your reader can understand. So, how are you going to do that? Well, the people that I'm going to present to you today have books, they have courses, they have websites that they are going to help us get our mind around how we're going to do that. We're going to do some planning and some brain science, add some structure to our story, and then go a little bit deeper on the prose, syntax, rhythm, and style. But I do want to make clear that this is more of a broad overview video where you're going to be seeing the resources that I used, and you're going to need to go and you're going to need to dig a bit deeper to really get the marrow, get the meat off those bones, and have it serve its purpose. So, the first book that I would recommend to you is called Blueprint for a Book. And this book is by my mentor, Jenny Nash. She is the original book coach, and she's been in the business for over 30 years. And she has developed a structure called Blueprint for a Book that really helps you to build your novel from the inside out, meaning, why are you writing this book? What do you want to communicate to the world and to readers? What do you want them to walk away from your story knowing or having reinforced about their belief system? Now, I am not going to lie to you. A lot of writers, when they first come to me, do not like the idea of pumping the brakes or taking a step back, as some of them see it, and taking the time to plan. But I have never had anyone who didn't thank me for forcing them to do that by the time things were all said and done. Because stopping, taking a breath, looking at your book from a different angle, or just taking that step back and looking at it as a whole really ends up saving you a lot of time and energy in the end. And more than that, it ensures that your story has a soul, something for your reader to grasp onto, something for them to remember long after they've read the last words. Now we're going to turn our attention to Lisa Cron, another excellent book coach in her own right. She wrote the book Story Genius, the craft book Story Genius. And this is an excellent an excellent craft book in the way that she dives into the human psyche. So she uses brain science to help you outline your book in a way that's not just going to tell the story plot wise, but it's going to go deep on an emotional level. And honestly, what we all come to the story for is the characters. We want to connect with those characters. We want to know why they're doing what they're doing and how they got to the place they're at. If you've been studying writing craft for any amount of time, you know that your protagonist should be a hot mess when the story starts, right? And we're going to dig them out of that hole slowly but surely. And so, how did they get here in the first place, and how are they going to get out of this hole, and why would your reader want to follow you along for 300 pages while they wait for that to happen? So Lisa Cron is going to help you find that, what she calls the third rail, the protagonist's inner struggle. Sometimes it's called a deep wound or a deep hurt, right? There's something that's driving that protagonist through this story, causing them to show up day after day after day, which, again, if you've been following writing craft for any amount of time, you know that they're doing it wrong for a long time before they ever get it right. Okay, let's move on now and talk about K.M. Whalen's book, Structuring Your Novel. So this was an excellent book that was very heavy on information, but not dense, if that makes sense. So K.M. Whalen has a real gift for educating you without overloading you. So that was really something that I treasured about this book. It taught me so much about structuring a novel. she's going to break down each of the terms and each of the words and give you definitions and then show you how you're going to implement them in structuring your own novel. It's very common for people to use the metaphor for novel structuring as a scaffolding. And that's very popular, and I certainly get why. That makes a lot of sense to me. I like to say it's a circus tent or it's tent poles. So I have an outline on my free resources on my website that you can go and grab if you'd like to after this video. And I'll link to it below also. But it's called the super simple outline. But the metaphor that I like to use is a circus tent. So if you imagine your entire story as this huge circus tent that has to be propped up in some way, right? And these are the tent poles that I talk about, the 7 to 9 tent poles of your story. Somehow we have to prop up this circus tent so that we aren't all crushed under the weight of it, right? And I like that metaphor because if it's not obvious to you, because sometimes as writers, we feel crushed under the weight of our story and we don't know how to get out from under that and how to write forward. So I prefer to use that metaphor. The scaffolding one certainly makes sense. But either way, I give you 7 to 9 steps or sentences to tell your entire story, which is not a lot of time, I know. And that's the purpose, because a lot of times when writers come to me, they are stuck. They don't know how to move forward. We talked about in the last video, the forest for the trees expression, right? And how you never knew that more intimately than when you're stuck in editing hell as a writer. But they need to zoom out. They need to see their story as a whole and see where they're moving next. So I like to use that tentpole example. Now, I'm going to move on to talking about some courses that I took that were really helpful to me. And yes, I'm going to link to all these books and all of these courses in the notes. So you can go down there to get links to all of these. But this is a course called Writing Mastery, Crafting Your Story in 15 Easy Steps. And it's available on udemy.com. It's by Jessica Brody, and she is teaching a Save the Cat method. So if you already know Save the Cat structure and you already know you don't prefer it, I know there are people out there who don't. That's absolutely fine. Don't buy the course. I want to warn you, but it is an excellent course if you don't know the Save the Cat structure, or maybe you've read the book and want it taught to you. She does an excellent job of bringing in examples from really popular shows that we've all seen or can easily get access to. And she really breaks it down step by step. And what I love about the Save the Cat method, this was originally written, by the way, by a screenwriter, Blake Schneider, or 4 screenwriters. Blake Schneider wrote the book, and Jessica Brody did Save the Cat writes a novel. So she tweaked it a little bit for the novel writer, but of course, a lot of the beliefs carry over. But she's going to walk you step by step. And what I love about it is 15 steps doesn't sound so simple, but it is simple because it gives you a lot of touch points. As a writer who's new or a writer who's struggling, it gives you a lot of touchstones to touch in and say, am I on the right path? Am I headed to the next place I'm trying to go? So that's one reason that I like to use it, especially with new or struggling writers. Next, I'm going to move on to BookFox's course. He has BookFox University, and he teaches many courses, but one of them is writing better sentences. And so he uses the 2-3-1 rule. And I'm not giving away all of his secrets, by the way, either one of them. This is all stuff they've published online. So you will have to buy their course to dig deeper, but I'm just giving away what they've already given away for free online. So he does the 2-3-1 rule, which is putting the second most important piece of information at the beginning of your sentence, the least important piece of information next, and the most important at the end, with the idea that that strongest emotional impact will come from the end of your sentence, not the beginning or the middle. And you do mix this up. You're not always going to do the exact same thing over and over. That's going to get tiresome, right? But if you have a sentence that you really want to land with your reader, this is the approach you're going to use. He also talks quite a bit about managing the focus of your reader. And this is a beautiful thing to learn as a writer. And I feel like a lot of writers learn to do this beautifully eventually, but he can really speed things along for you, which is using specific words. whether it's the type of word, whether it's a little bit more highbrow word or a more simple word. Sometimes simple is best, right? When we're talking about a fast action scene where we want the pacing to move, we don't want a lot of complicated words. And the way that you find this is you don't try to impress your audience, first of all, with the words that you like or you love, because if you're tripping over it, they're going to trip over it. And you might not trip over it because you don't know how to pronounce it or because you don't know the meaning of the word. You might know perfectly well how to pronounce it and the meaning of the word, but you're still tripping over that word, especially when it's read out loud. So you always have to read your work out loud, writers. But again, if you're tripping over it, they're going to. And that's not impressive to a reader. That's frustrating. So you might have to dumb it down a bit, guys. Okay. He's going to talk about pacing, how we're going to speed up our reader and force them to read faster, or how we're going to slow them down when we're coming down from a high action scene. Okay. And of course, always very, 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 we don't want things to become monotonous. We definitely don't want our reader to become bored. Now, I want to talk a little bit about sexy verbs and harnessing your adjectives and adverbs and then preposition pileups. Okay, so the sexy verb is just what it sounds like. It's using a more exciting verb than what you originally used. Now, occasionally, as a coach, I have to tell my writers, that I'm bored. I'm sorry, but this is too boring. Consider something very simple like she walked down the sidewalk, and how much more exciting it is if she hustled down the sidewalk or she even sprinted down the sidewalk, right? These are not big, complicated words that I'm using, but it's telling you a lot more about where her mind is at than just she walked down the sidewalk. If she's sprinting down the sidewalk, she's obviously in a hurry to get somewhere, no matter the consequences, right? She's knocking people over. She's ruining her favorite pair of shoes, whatever's happening. She has got to be somewhere now. If she's hustling down the sidewalk, this tells us even more. She's in a huge hurry, but she's not in a big enough hurry to be knocking people over or ruining her favorite pair of shoes or her hair or whatever it is she doesn't want to ruin, right? So anytime it's possible, add in those more exciting verbs. If once you read it aloud, it's too much or it's overkill, it's much easier to back off than to be adding those in later. You're going to want to harness your adjectives, meaning never put them there just to be decorative. You have to think about how many words your reader has to read to come along with you on this journey. Anywhere from 80,000 to 120,000 words if you're sticking to the typical traditional genre conventions, right? So you don't want to be putting any extra words in there that they're going to have to read. Again, it's not cute. They don't think you're clever. They're frustrated, okay? Same thing with adverbs, but a little different on adverbs, because adverbs are those ly words that you use when you say he said quietly, he said angrily, right? I'm sure you've heard this, but let me reinforce, because new writers fall prey to this all the time. They want to explain to their reader how he said it. But if your characters are showing up for work that day, if your verbs are doing the work they need to do, if your scene is doing the work it needs to do, you're not going to have to explain to the reader that he's angry. They're going to get that. They're going to get that all on their own. You can just say he said instead of he said angrily. Now, a preposition pileup, prepositions are those words that are explaining to it's kind of like an easy way to look at it is like the who, what, when, where, why of what's happening in the scene. Okay. So, but these can be very necessary, but they also can be overused quite a bit. So if you're looking at a scene where there's only two people in the scene and you're saying you need a dialogue tag and you say, he said to her, you don't need the to her because it's the only two people in the scene. Okay. If you have two characters who are talking about going to the store and they're walking down the street and they're obviously going to the store, you don't need to say at the end of that sentence, and they headed off in the direction of the store. We already know they're headed for the store, okay? This, again, is something that you catch a lot more easily when you're reading out loud, so I suggest you do that. Of course, a good editor can catch those things for you too. Now, we've all heard the idiom, you have to know the rules to break the rules effectively, and that's absolutely true. Um, so, we all have been brought up to not use a passive verb ever in a million years, no matter what happens. But obviously, that's not true because we've seen them used well. But again, this is a rule that you need to learn, and you need to learn to break well, not just Harry Carey, go through your novel and be writing the entire thing with passive verbs. You can do sentence fragments, but again, it's going to be for effect. It's not going to be for no reason at all. I've talked a little bit about mixing elevated language with more straightforward language, and I would absolutely suggest that you do that. Elevated language can certainly be used, but we're going to remember every little detail you put in is going to tell us something about your character. So if you don't have a character who has an elevated knowledge base, then they're not going to be using elevated language. There's nothing wrong with having characters who use very simple, very straightforward language, okay? Repetition can be a good thing. If you've ever heard of a word echo, this is a way that we don't want to repeat our words, where one word sounds very much like a word you use in the very next line. That's called a word echo, and we don't want to be using those, but sometimes some alliteration can be nice. It can have a good effect. And again, the suggestion I'm going to give you that for now, before we dig any deeper into it in a different video, is just to read your work out loud, because you can catch a lot of those, and to get a good editor, as always. So again, these are the books that I recommended to you guys. I'm going to link to the books and the courses and a couple of websites that I like to use even to this day. You can get a complete list of the writer's resources that I share with new writers or struggling writers. I still use them to this day. You can find me at my website. Go check out my free resources there. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest, all at the same place, Rochelle San Gabriel Book Coaching. Thank you so much for joining me today. And tomorrow we are talking about creating an outline for your novel. Join me for that.